This presentation references these works cited here. This is an action research proposal that focuses on student engagement at the secondary level, written, designed, and presented by Emily Kavanaugh. The problem and purpose will be explained, followed by the research questions. You will hear a literature review of 3 current peer-reviewed articles regarding student engagement. That research will relate to my own research questions and purpose and will be reflected in my own research methodology and design. Data collection will be reviewed, a force field analysis will be presented, and possible results will be reviewed. Future action plans will be discussed. Then you will hear a personal reflection at the conclusion of this presentation. Teaching high school for 2 years, I have made some observations. I noticed a low level of student engagement as I struggled with this in my own classroom and observed in many other classrooms. I also learned through personal conversations that teachers generally think they cannot control student motivation or engagement. Lastly, I noticed traditional teaching methods with lectures are pervasive in the building. The purpose of my own action research is to see if teachers can do specific things to affect student engagement. These 2 questions will guide research. Does a student-centered teaching model lead to an increase of student engagement in the classroom? And what is the increase of student engagement when teachers build relationships with students and use classroom management best practices while maintaining a more traditional teacher-centered classroom structure? I read a handful of peer-reviewed articles related to student engagement and learning. 3 will be reviewed here. Corso, Bundick, Quaglia, and Haywood most clearly define student engagement as a place where students, teachers, and content meet. These authors show how engagement is a byproduct of several relationships between learner and teacher, learner and content, and teacher and content. Teachers can keep in mind factors that affect student engagement include personality traits, thoughts and feelings within a student, student interactions with other students, and their interactions with academic content. My observations in a high school setting seem to be on par with many observations in the United States. Over 60% of students in the United States are observed to be bored and chronically disengaged from school. This disengagement may be a result of the complexity of engaging students. Each student meets class in each task and each teacher with a different context. Teachers seem to lack a framework for student engagement. Gage, Scott, Hearn, and Mixuga add to this discussion by finding that students are much less engaged in a classroom with low rates of classroom management. According to the research reviewed, there may be specific things we can examine as educators, putting the control back in our power. Examining some of them will be the focus of our own action research. Student engagement may be related to student-teacher interactions and relationships, opportunities for students to respond during a lesson, rate of positive feedback from teacher to students during class, non-traditional learning models such as student-centered and flipped classrooms, and using incentives, but not bribes or threats, in conjunction with positive relationships and clearly defined expectations in your classroom. Bradford, Mauter, and Boat offer more insights into student engagement through specific student-centered techniques. Student-centered learning, SCL, and team-based learning, TBL, is what many may refer to as group work, but teachers are there to facilitate collaboration. Teachers may structure classroom time differently to increase teacher and student interaction time. These authors have even found that student-centered collaborative settings allow students to outperform peers learning individually. Gage, Scott, Hearn, and Mixuga used a methodology for data collection that included direct observations of one student at a time for no more than 15 minutes. Names of students and teachers were not used. Students were systematically chosen and alternated between male and female. Observers noted percent of time teaching, rate of feedback, rate of opportunities to respond, or OTR, and percent of time students were passively engaged, which we're going to be considering on task. Unlike the previous experiment, Bradford, Mauter, and Boat did not use a random sampling of students. Instead, they focused on 2 college-level criminal justice classes that had different professors but used the same textbook. One class was more student-centered and the other more traditional. A survey was given to student population after implied consent was obtained that collected demographic data as well as questions regarding student emotional and active engagement using a scale of 0 corresponding to strongly disagree, 1 corresponding to disagree, etc. Ultimately, students reported feeling more actively engaged when they felt learning was relevant, they got something out of class, and when they felt prepared for class. Increasing student engagement is found to have many benefits for students, teachers, and the classroom environment. Student populations who are more engaged achieve better results on standardized tests, have a low percentage of dropout rates, and a higher percentage of students go on to pursue higher education. This also creates a positive spiral for teachers and the learning environment. Higher engagement results in decreased disruptions, less time spent on behavioral management and discipline. This in turn makes the learning environment even more engaging, which continues the cycle. Should this action research be implemented in secondary math classes, it will be considered quasi-experimental due to the lack of random sampling of students and using 3 groups of students in existing classrooms instead. Using a control group is less common in these type of experiments, but it will allow us to identify any anomalies that might occur in data collection, account for differences in group demographics that might occur between the 3 classes, and extrapolate conclusions through comparison. In the control group, no different strategies or techniques will be employed beyond that of a traditional teacher in a traditional classroom setting. In a second comparison group, the teacher will structure lessons in order to integrate student-centered learning opportunities. In the third comparison group, the teacher will focus on increasing the OTR rate and the positive feedback rate while decreasing the negative feedback rate. To further triangulate data in this research, pre-experiment data will be collected. The pre-experiment data should help lessen any inconsistencies due to lack of random sampling in this experiment. Researchers will conduct at least 2 observations per classroom per week of school during the experiment. Before starting classroom treatments, at least 5 observations need to be made in each classroom. Observation numbers should remain consistent across the board in an alternating fashion. Observations of the 3 classes then will be collected around the same time period, which will keep consistency of observations through any stages of the school year, such as around holidays, field trips, events, school closing, testing, etc. Approaching collection this way will ensure that the data points will retain fidelity and be comparable at the end of the experiment. Observation notes will be considered qualitative, but time engaged will be quantitative data we can display graphically after the collection. Another method of data collection will be a questionnaire given before, during, and after treatment. The questionnaire will follow general data collection protocol, which includes maintaining brevity in questions, avoiding leading responses, using age-appropriate language, providing explicit directions, providing purpose of the survey, and indicating whether the survey will be anonymous or confidential. Following these protocols will ensure that the survey data is usable for drawing accurate conclusions about student engagement. The questionnaire will ask the student's gender, age, and provide several statements for students to reflect about their own engagement. The response options will include strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly agree. Some of the statements will be in relation to small group work, team learning, incentives, learning styles, enjoying school, enjoying class, and enjoying learning. The data can be considered qualitative unless numerical values are assigned to each response, after which researchers can analyze data numerically to find trends or lack thereof. Additional forms of qualitative data will include the teachers keeping documentation journals. Teachers will reflect on a particular lesson very briefly, documenting any important student interactions and observations of student behaviors, attitudes, time on task, and engaged as they have observed. Data collection related to teacher documentation will be teacher interviews. Teachers are on the front lines with students, and while they reflect on their documentation, they will be good candidates for interviews. Interviews can be more time-intensive and invasive than mere surveys, as Metcalf explained in the Module 3 presentation from ACE, and it is generally felt that the qualitative data collected in this case will be of high quality. There are similar protocols for interviews as for surveys with a few differences. Give clear instructions, keep the number of questions around 10, avoid personal issues, advise whether an interview will be recorded, transcribed, etc. Most importantly, the interview will have to limit body language and maintain monotone voice patterns as they ask questions.